There are a lot of ways to destroy a submarine. Throwing knives and shooting flares aren't on the list. But that didn't stop the crew of one enterprising destroyer from turning a battle on the high seas into something more like a barroom brawl. It's the Second World War, and German U-boats are wreaking havoc on Allied shipping in the Atlantic. With this vital logistic lifeline in danger of being cut off, the Allies are spending tremendous effort on anti-submarine warfare. A large portion of naval forces are being used as escort duty, basically acting like sheepdogs to protect the vulnerable cargo ships against the appropriately named U-boat wolf packs. Some ships are being given a more proactive mission. Entering the story is Task Group 2114, which consists of the flagship escort carrier USS Card and 3 Clemson-class destroyers, the USS Graaf, the USS Borie, and the USS Borie. Their mission is simple: patrol the Atlantic, find German U-boats, and make sure they stay underwater permanently. Late October 1943, the task group is patrolling in the North Atlantic. At the same time, a 6-sub wolf pack, which includes U-405, is meeting with a resupply sub. The U-405 is a Type 7C, the workhorse of the Kriegsmarine, commanded by experienced skipper Korvettenkapitän Rolf Heinrich Hauptmann. The Wolfpack is undergoing resupply operations when they're spotted and briefly engaged by aircraft from the USS Card. The Borie is sent to investigate the location and encounter its first U-boat, U-256. After 3 depth charge attacks, the Borie spots an oil slick and presumes the sub has been sunk, although it actually survives and limps back to port. The night of October 31st, 1943, radar on the Borie detects something, and the commander, Lieutenant Charles Hutchins, gives orders to investigate. When the Borie is within 2,800 yards, the radar contact disappears as U-405 submerges. In ever-worsening seas, the destroyer picks up the sub with sonar and engages. A malfunction causes all the depth charges in the racks to fire at once. The resulting blast is intense, and the Borie's stern is lifted clear from the water, forcing U-405 to surface. Hutchins orders the searchlight on, and with the sub clearly visible, the guns on the destroyer can open up. No one knows why, but U-405 is unable to dive at that moment, so several crewmen attempt to shoot back using the deck guns. However, these men barely begin to fire before being killed by fire from the Borie's 20mm anti-aircraft guns. At this point, one of the German sailors stands on the conning tower and waves frantically as if trying to surrender. Hutchins gives the order to cease fire. Unfortunately, one of the sailors manning a 4-inch gun has removed his headphones and doesn't hear the command and keeps firing. The German sailor is violently dispatched. U-405 begins evasive maneuvers and leads the Borie on a wild chase, both sides exchanging gunfire. The weather is steadily worsening, and with more violent swells and decreasing visibility, this becomes less effective than hoped. After a few minutes, Hutchins decides on a new tactic. With all the weaponry he has at his disposal, he tries something straight from the Bronze Age. But first, let's talk about another kind of threat, one that doesn't involve battleships or torpedoes. Here on Simple History, we often discuss the dangers people faced in the past, from wars and revolutions to surveillance states. Today, however, there's a different, modern threat: the quiet trade of your personal data. Right now, your private information, like your home address, phone number, email, even your relatives' names, might be bought and sold online. And not just by shady scammers or hackers, but by data brokers, insurance companies, and other organizations you've probably never heard of. That's why we're partnering with today's sponsor, Delete Me. A few months ago, while researching a video on Cold War surveillance, one of our researchers stumbled into just how widespread modern digital tracking is. Unlike spies of the past who needed trench coats and wiretaps, today's data collectors operate in the open, compiling your personal info into a giant database without you even realizing it. Delete Me steps in to stop that. When you sign up, their privacy experts go to work finding and removing your personal data from those broker sites. You'll get regular reports showing exactly what's been removed, and they keep checking back to make sure it stays gone. For us, that peace of mind is worth it. It's like having your own personal intelligence agency, but one that works for you. If you want to take control of your privacy and stop data brokers from profiting off your personal info, you can get 20% off Delete Me's consumer plans by going to joindeleteme.com/simplehistory and using the code SimpleHistory at checkout. Now, back to it.
Stand by for a ram,
he shouts. Increasing speed to 25 knots, the bow of the Borie is pointed right at U-405. Hauptmann orders the sub to turn, but it's too late. Right before contact, however, a large swell lifts the Borie, which then slams down on the U-boat's deck between the stem and the forecastle, locking the ships together. The deck guns on both ships are unable to be elevated or depressed enough to be effective. Fortunately for the Borie, the crew is prepared for exactly this sort of situation. Other than the gun crews and the Black Gang, who are the fire control crewmen and engine room sailors, all other hands that can be spared rush to their places, grabbing their Thompson submachine guns, pistols, riot control shotguns, and anything else they can get a hold of, and rush to the port side to open up on the Germans. There aren't enough small arms to go around, so a bit of creativity is in order. In the middle of the fighting, one of the Borie's sailors sees a German on the U-boat's deck, hurls his knife at him, plunging into his stomach. Another shoots a signal flare at near point-blank range, and one Kriegsmarine plummets to a watery end when he's knocked overboard with a thrown 4-inch shell casing. Like the saying goes, if it's stupid, but it works, it ain't stupid. After about 10 minutes, both ships are sliding apart from one another. U-405's casualties are catastrophic, with only 14 men of the original 49 still on their feet. The Borie is suffering heavy damage and holes are torn into the hull. The forward engine room is flooding and the crew is working frantically to plug the leaks, working in neck-deep water to keep the ship afloat and the engines running. U-405 tries to flee again, but is bracketed and hit by another salvo of 4-inch guns. Even in such poor shape, the U-boat has a tighter turning radius than the destroyer and aligns the sub's stern torpedo tubes at the Borie.
shut off that light,
comes the order from Hutchins, and the searchlights cut out. Unable to see the destroyer, Hauptmann orders the U-boat to flee. Once they turn away, the searchlight is turned on again, and the firing continues. With no other option, U-405 tries to turn the tables on the Borie and attempts its own ramming attack. The destroyer launches 3 depth charges and then turns sharply, the submarine narrowly missing the Borie. After the depth charges, U-405 is dead in the water. With no other choice, Hauptmann surrenders and his surviving 14 men clamber aboard life rafts. They fire signal flares into the air to mark their position, and the Borie maneuvers to pick up the survivors. Unfortunately, in the distance, answering flares shoot up into the sky. There are no American ships in that direction, so this signal means only one thing: another U-boat is on the way. After sustaining heavy damage and expending so much ordnance, the USS Borie is in no condition to take on the rest of the wolf pack. Even worse, the sonar operator hears the distinctive sound of a torpedo heading straight for them. The ship begins evasive maneuvers, and a number of crewmen witness a torpedo missing them by mere feet. Unfortunately, the zigzag path caused the Borie to run over the life rafts of U-405, killing all aboard. All 49 of the submarine's crew perish in the engagement. The USS Borie escapes without further contact with the enemy, but this isn't the end of its ordeal. Seawater continues to flood into the ship, and the crews work frantically to keep the ship afloat and under power. They spend the rest of the night doing everything they can, and even resort to dumping the torpedoes, their launchers, the 20mm cannons, extra 4-inch shells, and anything else that can be spared in a desperate attempt to lighten the ship. At 9 a.m. on November 1st, the only remaining turbine stops running, and the Borie is dead in the water. A radio message is sent, and the USS Card receives it at 11:10 a.m. The USS Graaf and USS Barrett are dispatched, and the Card launches search planes which spot the Borie. Salvaging the Borie is hopeless, so at around 4:30 p.m., Hutchins orders abandon ship. They climb into the life rafts to transfer to the Graaf and the Borie, but the high seas and frigid water cause some of the boats to capsize. 27 men succumb to drowning or hypothermia. The USS Borie is then scuttled with depth charges and bombs from the aircraft and slips beneath the waves. During this unusual fight, none of the Borie's men were killed in the engagement. The crew received a Presidential Unit Citation and the Navy Cross was given to Hutchins and 2 other crewmen. A year after, another destroyer named USS Borie was commissioned, continuing the legacy of one of the more unusual naval encounters of the Second World War. Thanks again, Delete Me, for sponsoring this video. To get your data removed from the internet, check out Delete Me with our link in the description and get 20% off.